As a movie lover, there are just some names that instantly grab my attention, two of which are Neon and Osgood Perkins. Neon being the production company behind some of the most thought-provoking cinema in the last few years, having won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival an unprecedented 6 times in a row. As for son of horror legend Anthony Perkins, Osgood Perkins solidified himself and his name in the horror genre with his 2024 film Longlegs, my full-length review of which you can see here, but essentially his ability to craft a myth around a new boogeyman had my attention instantly, and I knew anything that he put forth from that film on, I was going to check out. And I didn't love his follow-up film, The Monkey, based on a Stephen King story, as much as I loved Longlegs. However, I was still enamored by his innate ability to create a sense of dread and really command a sense of tone in his work. And seeing how vastly different those two films were, I was so curious to check out his next film, which funnily enough, I found out was filmed in between production for Longlegs and The Monkey. So when you have a director with such a wide range being able to deliver a David Fincher-esque thriller with Longlegs all the way to a Final Destination-inspired horror comedy with The Monkey, where else can this director go, and are there more surprises in store? Hi, my name is Emily or La Movie Mija. I'm a part-time filmmaker, full-time movie lover, and this is my review of Keeper. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, thank you so much for checking out my video. I am a team of one, writing and producing and editing all of my own movie related content at Movie Mija, everywhere you can find me without the use of any AI.
Confront AI.
So it means the world to me that you found my channel. For this review, the first part will be spoiler free, just giving you a taste of what to expect. And then I'll get into some more spoiler analysis, trying to answer the questions that I left the theater with and addressing that very bonkers ending. And there's a lot to talk about with this one, so let's get into it. A romantic anniversary trip to a secluded cabin turns sinister when a dark presence reveals itself, forcing a couple to confront the property's haunting past. The film is directed by Osgood Perkins and it stars Tatiana Maslany, Rossif, Sutherland, Birkett, Turton, and Weiss. So the first thing I want to get into with this film are the visuals, because this is a very highly meditative, slow burn type of horror film that kind of unfolds a mystery as you go along. It's a very small in scope as far as the story goes, very limited characters, and it was really interesting to see such a contained story told in this single location thriller. So the visuals do a lot of the heavy lifting of driving that tense dread that just really carries you through the entire film. And what Osgood Perkins is able to achieve in this movie is so mesmerizing. Like, I wanted to look away, but I just couldn't. Every single frame is like a horrific painting. The way that he utilizes negative space and geometry to craft a sense of uneasiness has to be studied. You find yourself peering into shadows, and you're like, as an audience, you're staring into these really dark and eerie corners of this house that you don't really ever get a strong sense of its layout. And I think that's purposeful, because just like the main character, you don't really know where you are at any given point. You don't know a way to get out of there. So it really does wonders to add to this level of dread and unease, the way that he just pulls you around this house in a way that makes you feel like you never really understand where you are. You don't get a strong sense of place. And again, that use of geometry, the different angles with this beautiful A-frame cabin that they had as their single location is just so incredibly wonderful. Because this film is more meditative and it's a slower burn, it's more spiritually akin to one of his earlier films, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. And I think that what happens in this film is there's like a repetition of images that kind of lull you into a false sense of security. And they also simultaneously train your eye to look in a certain direction. And I found it so incredibly deceptive, the way that he was able to pull my gaze into these different shadowy corners of the house. And it was really such a visually stunning experience. I really love the juxtaposition of being out in the great outdoors in the woods, but still feeling so claustrophobic and enclosed. And while we're talking about visuals and spooky geometry, I want to also mention the creature design in this film, because they are so wholly unique. I don't know if like Osgood Perkins is a gamer, but some of these reminding me a little bit of like Silent Hill. You can definitely see some Junji Ito, the Japanese artist, influence in their designs as well. You also get hints of like Commedia dell'arte masks. And all of these come together in a very effective way. The practical effects, the makeup design, the CGI, all of it is integrated so well to terrifying results. I think it's really cool to see such a different look of a monster, and especially when you compound the idea of Osgood Perkins playing with your expectations visually and having you peer into the shadows, and then you have these very jarring like faces staring back at you finally. It is something that definitely is unnerving. Going hand in hand with the top tier visuals of this film is the masterful performance by Tatiana Maslany. She is so good in this movie. I would put her on the Mount Rushmore of horror movie performances by women, with like Hereditary with Toni Collette. You have Lupita Nyong'o in Us. You have Florence Pugh in Midsommar. And then you have Tatiana Maslany in Keeper. She is so good in this movie. She spends the first half of the film on this lover's trip, kind of meandering with this nagging suspicion that her boyfriend is like too good to be true. So every interaction that she has with him, you never really know where she is on that spectrum of like, does she trust him? Does she not trust him? And we get to witness flashes of that uncertainty and little glimmers through every interaction that she has with her boyfriend. And as her mistrust and her discomfort grows, her desperation becomes harder to contain, and there's an explosive quality to her performance that just takes over. It is incredibly well acted. I mean, Rossif Sutherland is a great scene partner for her as well, but I mean, Tatiana Maslany, this is the star of this movie. So now is when I break the news that I have been misleading you with this review thus far, only singing its praises up until this point because I wanted to share what I loved about the film before getting into what I didn't love about this movie. And what I didn't love about this movie itself was the narrative, the story, the dialogue. The script for this film was written by Nick Lepard, who previously this year brought us Dangerous Animals, another horror thriller film. And similar to that movie, I feel like the characters in this movie just kind of reach a point of exploration. I want and I crave a very deep exploration of the humanity of these characters. What makes them tick, what makes them afraid, what their desires and motivations are. I'm not saying you have to over-explain and overindulge every aspect of these characters just because the movie is small in scope, single location, single weekend, only 4 characters, that you have to then owe the audience everything there is to know about these people. But when I think about small in scope, contained stories that thematically work well because they aid in this feeling of claustrophobia, I think about movies like The Babadook, and the way that we are getting the character exploration through the narrative in that film is so magnificent. And when you look at this film, there is so much potential for thematic exploration about the gender politics of dating and how the tension between Malcolm and Liz devolves throughout the story. I also take issue with the way that the mystery unfolds upon itself. As a mystery, I feel like this movie reveals its hand way too early, setting up our expectations for what to expect going into the latter half of the film, very easily allowing us to be suspicious of certain characters, hedge our bets on where we think the danger is going to come from. And granted, I don't think that necessarily takes away from the quality of a movie-going experience if like the surprise is surprising or not. I don't like to get into that territory of categorizing a movie as good or bad if the surprise is living up to my expectations. But I think the journey of the surprise and how it unfolds upon itself, like I think that experience is worth critiquing. And I think in the way that this film presents its mystery, it kind of loses a lot of steam in the middle half of the film. I do think that this film could have been a little bit shorter because it does run out of like narrative steam partway through. It has a strong opening. I do like the way the movie ended, but the experience of getting there just kind of didn't do it for me. And I think thematically, this film is exploring something so interesting right now, especially given that we got the film Together earlier this year from Alison Brie and Dave Franco, another instance of relationship trauma. I think if you enjoyed that movie and the questions that it was poking about like people in relationships and like what to look out for when you're dating somebody, I think there's also something to be had and explored in this film as well. I just wish it would have gone to the lengths of giving us those character explorations and really diving into what makes those characters tick and the true terror of feeling like you don't know the people that you are dating. Overall, I feel like this was a breathtaking visual experiment from Osgood Perkins. Definitely left a great taste in my mouth as far as wanting to seek out more films that he does in the future. I was thoroughly impressed with Tatiana Maslany. I mean, the whole cast was very strong, but she just shoulders such a powerful powerhouse of a performance. However, I do think that the experience of the mystery as it presents itself and we descend into madness with these characters just leaves a little bit to be desired. And on the Movie Mija meter, I give Keeper 3.5 out of 5 stars. All right, we've reached the end of our spoiler-free discussion. We're now going to get into some spoiler territory where we talk about some of those unanswered questions the movie leaves us with and that wild ending. So this is your last warning. If you haven't seen the film, make sure you like this video, save it, come back later, and we can talk about what went down. So let's first summarize the ending. It first all comes to a head when Liz confronts Malcolm about Mrs. Portnoy. Mrs. Portnoy was his patient that he said he was going to tend to, who was coming out of a scheduled coma. And that was the whole reason why he left her alone in the cabin to go to the city so he could tend to Mrs. Portnoy. So she asks him like a good girlfriend, like, hey, how is your patient? And he goes, who? What? Where? I don't know who you're talking about. And that's when she knew that she needed to get out of that house. I mean, I knew she needed to get out of the house when they had the whole debacle over the chocolate cake. When that man insisted that she try a piece of that chocolate cake after she said she straight up hated chocolate, both him and his cousin were so wrong for impressing upon her that she needed to try that caretaker's chocolate cake. It was so unnerving seeing her eat it in her frenzied state. Like, it looked like there was body parts in it. I don't know what to make of that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So she confronts him about Mrs. Portnoy. He doesn't know what she's talking about. So she knows that he was lying and she knows it's time to leave. But as she's trying to escape, he basically lets all of his cards show and explains to her that, yeah, I brought you here for this like sacrifice that I need to do because you specifically look like the woman that I suspected to be a witch who came onto our family's property 200 years ago. Yes, him and his cousin Darren, as children, took their muskets and hunted down this woman who was trespassing on their property. You know, they didn't like shy her away. They didn't like tell her she needed to leave. They straight up murdered this woman for trespassing, which I think is very uncalled for. The woman from 200 years ago was also pregnant, so she gave birth to these monsters that the children, Malcolm and Darren, made a deal with that they would sacrifice somebody to them so that they can, in exchange, have the monsters prolong their life. So they are, even though they're 200 years old, they're no older than like 45. Anyway, so Liz hears all this and like tries to escape and she is unsuccessful in getting out of there. She wakes up in the basement surrounded by the monsters. And you know what? This man thought it was a great idea to kidnap a woman who looks like the mother's monsters and think like once they see her, they're going to eat her. No, those are her children. She is mother. So what does Liz do? She decides to mother. So even as these monsters are closing in around her, they don't attack her. She embraces their embrace. It was a very terrifying scene, but she basically lets them take over her and she knows that they're not going to harm her because she's what? She's mother. Malcolm, on the other hand, goes to bed thinking that he is A-okay in the clear and wakes up an elderly man because he rapidly aged because the sacrifice didn't go through. So the deal is off. And in his old age, he can no longer defend himself. And Liz strings him up upside down. She lets him know this is my house now and then proceeds to lower him into a jar where his head is submerged in a jar of like preservation juice or whatever. The same jar that Witch Liz, the version of her from 200 years ago, her head was submerged in and the monsters had, taken her head out of the jar to show Liz like, hey, mom, this you? And Liz was like, yeah, I'll be your mom. So yeah, that's how he goes. And that's how Liz wins the weekend. So what is actually going on here? One of my big questions was, is Liz, the Liz Witch version, was she actually a witch? And I think given that she gives birth to all of these monstrous creatures, that there has to be something mystical going on with her, whether she was a witch or she was like a fairy who made a deal with the demon. We don't know. This movie does kind of feel very folk horror informed. So it could be that she has some other kind of mystical explanation as to why she's giving birth to these monster babies. But I think the horrendous part about all of this is that you have two children who murdered a woman and then proceeded to make a deal with those monsters to sacrifice something to them every year so that they can help keep them young. And when we look at the relationship between Malcolm and Darren and the monsters, as well as Malcolm and Darren and the women they've dated, these are two instances in which these men are enacting predatory behavior to their advantage. So with the women that they are dating, they're using their positions and power to take advantage of women. They are men with financial success. They own property. Malcolm at least shows us that he is a very attentive, like kind of person. The way that he is showering Liz with compliments by buying her art and talking about how it's one of the pieces that the best pieces he's ever seen. He's really much giving her all these praises. So it seems like he knows how to walk the walk to be a seemingly good partner, at least to the effect where he is able to date these women for a full year, essentially bringing them to the cabin on their anniversary trip to then sacrifice them, which is such a scary thought. The idea that this man is just rehearsing over and over again how to be a good partner and not really experiencing love in a very basic level, but is preying upon these women in order to feed his need to stay young. And that is also getting into this idea about older men consistently needing to date younger women, because I do think that Liz is younger than Malcolm in this film. She has a lot of insecurities about herself as well, and I think he sees that about her. So I don't know if I really trust that he does love her truly, but I know that he sees that he can take advantage of her insecurities. I definitely get the sense that he's preying upon Liz because she is so self-conscious and insecure. She is so self-degrading when he is trying to attempt to compliment her for her art pieces. She writes it off as like nothing special. She doesn't seem to take a lot of pride and care of herself. She seems very insecure and isolated. And I think he knows that about her, and that is what has made her such a valuable candidate for the sacrifice position. And then when we look at the way that Darren and Malcolm interact with the monsters, you can also see them as taking advantage of these monster babies and making a deal with them to help keep them young. So that they're not caring for these babies. They are using them to their advantage. They are very advantageous in all ways, taking advantage of these babies, taking advantage of these women in these romantic relationships, and using them all for a very selfish, self-serving purposes. And we knew that about him. I think that was part of my frustration with this movie, is that very early on, we are allowed to be suspicious of Malcolm and Darren, especially when they're trying to get her to try that frickin' chocolate cake, that most menacing chocolate cake since Matilda. There has not been a chocolate cake this terrifying and off-putting since Matilda. Bruce. Once he insisted upon her trying that cake, even though she said she hated chocolate, I knew that this man could not be trusted, that the dangers of the world were not going to be coming from outside of the cabin. The call was coming from inside the house. I like the way that we do see some particular instances of like female camaraderie in this film, especially with Minka's trying to warn Liz about the cake, letting her know it tastes like and we seen that she had just eaten the cake herself. And so she's trying to like give her a little heads up, like, hey, don't try that cake. And I also think of the monsters themselves as women. I mean, at one point I thought that the monsters were the women transformed, like the past romantic lovers had turned into monsters through some kind of mythical transformation. And I thought it was like more of a metaphor about how we make monsters out of our exes through the narrative that we share about them. But we can let that go. That's not the case. The monsters were the children of the witch version of Liz from 200 years ago. And Malcolm and Darren took advantage of these babies. And when those babies saw their mother again, they came together and supported her and like helped her defeat Malcolm. And I also like to think of those monster babies as women too, because they do present like more female presenting. They have long hair, some are wearing dresses. And so in my brain, those are female monster babies and they're helping their mother. And I think there's a little nugget of an idea of like female camaraderie to overcome these systems of predatory practices that men take in the dating field. You see, and that's part of my frustration with this movie is that I feel like it's so much more fun to analyze it and talk about it than it was the experience of watching the mystery unfold. But I do think that this could be a movie that warrants like more fun on a rewatch because we know the twist and the ending. We could be looking for more of those clues throughout the movie. But I also find it fascinating that Liz is very hard to nail throughout the movie. Like the way that Tatiana Maslany plays her, we never really know where she is in her headspace. Like, is she somewhere very vulnerable? Is she being tripped out by that chocolate cake? Was she drugged? We don't know if she is just kind of like anxious because she is in an unfamiliar place with a man who she feels a lot of anxiety towards right now because she doesn't know if this man has a secret life with a wife and kids and that she's the other woman. Like there's so many possibilities about the people you're dating and what can go wrong, and that layer of mistrust and what women risk specifically when they are dating men is very unnerving. But those those are just some of my thoughts and interpretations for this film. I'm so curious if anyone has other interpretations or ideas or theories about this movie. If you see another creator also making a video, please tag me in the comments so I can come find it as well, because I'm so excited to hear what other people have to say about the way this movie unfolds. But hey, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, maybe you should consider liking and subscribing to my channel so you can get one new movie review from me every single week. And if you want even more movie news, reviews, and personal insights from me, you can follow me at Movie Mija on TikTok, Letterboxd, and Instagram. All right, that is all for now. Thank you so much again for watching my video. I'll see you next time. Bye!